She hadn't called me that in almost 20 years. Wrench. That was it. Just the one word, said quietly across the kitchen table while her husband was in the next room getting more wine. She looked at me the way she used to when she was small and had done something she wasn't sure I'd understand. Not frightened exactly. More like she was testing whether I was still the same person she remembered. I am a retired mechanical engineer. Spent 31 years at a fabrication plant outside of Moncton. The kind of work where if you made a mistake, something broke. And you learned to see problems before they became disasters. My daughter grew up watching me take things apart on the garage floor, engines, appliances, anything that had stopped working the way it should. When she was maybe 7 or 8, she started handing me tools before I asked for them. She had a feel for it. One afternoon I reached out my hand and she put a 1/2-inch socket wrench in it, exactly right, without me saying a word. After that I started calling her Wrench. She called Cole's wrench back because she thought that was funnier. It became our thing. A private joke that faded out somewhere around the time she started high school and decided her father was an embarrassment. I hadn't heard it in a long time. My son-in-law came back into the kitchen with the bottle and topped up everyone's glass. He was cheerful the way he always was. Easy laugh, good stories, the kind of man who could talk to anyone at a party. I had liked him from the start, which, looking back now, made me trust my instincts a little less in those early weeks when things began to feel wrong. My daughter looked at her wine and didn't look at me again for the rest of the evening. I drove home on the Trans-Canada with the radio off. The November sleet was coming in sideways off the Northumberland Strait, and the road had that particular shine that means black ice underneath. I kept my speed down and thought about that one word, wrench. The way she'd said it, quiet, deliberate, like she was leaving a note somewhere only I would find it. I am not a man who jumps to conclusions. That's something you learn doing the kind of work I did. You don't assume the worst until you've ruled out everything simpler, but you also don't ignore the data in front of you. I slept badly. In the morning, I called her. She didn't pick up. I sent a text that said only, "Good to see you last night. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't mention the word. I didn't want her husband to see the message and wonder what it meant. I didn't know yet what I was dealing with. She called me back at 11:15 from her office number. "Hey," she said. "Hey." There was a pause. I waited. "I can't really talk right now." "I know," I said. "But you reached out." Another pause. "I just wanted to say hi. You haven't called me Wrench since you were 15. The silence that followed was long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. "Can you come for lunch Thursday?" she said finally. "Just the two of us. There's a place near my office." "I'll be there," I said. She was already sitting when I arrived, which told me something. She'd gotten there early. She had coffee in front of her, and she was holding the mug with both hands, even though the place was warm. My daughter is 41 years old. She's a project manager for a civil engineering firm, which means she spends her days organizing complicated things and keeping people in line. She is not a person who gets rattled easily. I watched her buy her first house at 29, negotiate the deal herself, never once looked panicked. Watching her now, with both hands on that coffee mug and her eyes a little too still, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night she called me from a payphone at 16 because she'd missed the last bus and didn't want her mother to know she'd gone to a concert in the city. I sat down. I ordered coffee. I waited for her to start. "You remember when I mentioned we were thinking about diversifying?" she said. I did remember. It had come up at Thanksgiving vaguely. In passing, something about moving some of their RSPs into different vehicles, now that her husband had left his firm and they'd had a liquidity event. I hadn't thought much about it. They were both sensible people with good incomes. That's not the kind of thing I worry about. "There was a man," she said. "He came up at Brendan's retirement thing back in the spring. Friend of a friend. His name was," she paused. "He said his name was Roland Thierry." The way she said "he said" registered before she finished the sentence. He was very easy to talk to. He knew a lot about infrastructure projects, which obviously is relevant to what I do. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours. He followed up the next week. We met for coffee. He had a website, references, the whole thing. He managed a fund called Crestview Yield Partners. She stopped. "How much?" I said. She looked at the table. We hadn't moved any money yet, but I had told him about the settlement from the plant closure. The full amount. I kept my face still. I don't know why I did that, she said. I keep going back to it. He asked about our situation in a way that felt like due diligence, like he was making sure we were the right fit for the fund. It felt like he was vetting us, not the other way around. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel. That's the whole design. But I didn't say that yet. When did this start? I asked. Spring. The first coffee was in May. We've met 4 times since then. The last time was 3 weeks ago. He said they were closing the current round of subscriptions at the end of November, and if we wanted to participate, we'd need to transfer by the 14th. The 14th of this month. Yes. Has he asked for anything in writing from you? Signatures? Account numbers? He sent a subscription agreement. We haven't signed it. Does your husband know you're talking to me about this? She shook her head. He thinks it's a good opportunity. He did his own research. Roland checked out. The firm had a website, a LinkedIn, references we called. One of the references was someone Brendan actually knew from a previous job. That last detail sat in the air between us. What made you say wrench? I asked. She wrapped her hands around the mug again. 3 weeks ago, when I got home from the last meeting, something was off. I couldn't name it then. He'd said something. He'd mentioned a detail about the settlement that I hadn't told him. I thought I had, and then I went back over all our conversations in my head, and I hadn't. I had told him roughly the amount and that it came from an industrial settlement. I had not told him it was specifically from the West Point closure. She looked at me. He knew it was West Point. The West Point fabrication closure had been in the local news 2 years ago. It was findable, but that's different from bringing it up casually in conversation, as though she'd mentioned it herself. He'd been researching you, I said. She nodded. Not you specifically, I said. He was researching the settlement. Who received it, roughly how much, who might be looking to invest it. You weren't a person he met at a party. You were a target he identified and then arranged to meet. The color went out of her face a little. That's not. You don't know that for sure. No, I said. But let me look into it. I've done some things in my life that required patience, and I've done some things that required speed. This required both. The 14th was 12 days away. I started with the website for Crestview Yield Partners. On the surface, it was professional, a clean layout, a mailing address in Halifax, a regulatory registration number from the Nova Scotia Securities Commission. I pulled up the NSSC public registry and searched the registration number. It came back to a different firm entirely. Different name, but principals struck off in 2019. The registration number on the Crestview site was fraudulent. I wrote that down. I searched Roland Thierry. There was a LinkedIn profile, well-maintained, connections in the right industries. But the headshot, I ran it through a reverse image search and found the original on the website of a financial planner in Ontario, a real person with a real name who had nothing to do with Roland Thierry or Crestview Yield Partners. I had a name to check next. The reference who'd been known to Brendan from a previous job. It took me the better part of a morning to trace it, calling around through people I know from the industry. When I found the actual person, a retired procurement manager named Hector who did genuinely know Brendan from a job site in 2014, he had no memory of ever recommending anyone named Roland Thierry. He'd received a call several months ago, he said, from someone who identified themselves as a journalist doing a story on investment opportunities in Atlantic Canada. He'd spoken generally about the industry. He didn't remember saying anything specific about his old colleague's name. Someone had mined that connection and used it. I wrote that down too. The subscription agreement my daughter had scanned and sent me was dense with language that looked regulatory, but wasn't quite. The font was right, the tone was right, but the governing body it cited, the Atlantic Investment Oversight Board, doesn't exist. I searched it in every direction, nothing. On day 4, I called a contact I've known for 20 years, a woman named, I'll just call her the compliance officer, who had spent her career in securities regulation before retiring to Sackville. I explained what I had. She listened without interrupting. The fabricated regulator is the tell, she said. That's a signature move. They make up a name that sounds plausible, something regional, because people don't look it up. They assume it's real because they've never heard of it before. You've never heard of the AIOB because it doesn't exist, and nobody thinks to check. What do we do with what I have? I asked. You report it, she said, RCMP and the actual NSSC. And I'd suggest the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. They have a database for exactly this. If this operation has run before, and they always have run before, there will be a file. I thanked her and hung up. I called my daughter. I need you to come here this evening, I said. Bring the subscription agreement, all the emails, every communication you have with this man. Don't tell your husband yet. I'll explain why when you get here. She arrived at 6:30. She sat at the same kitchen table where I'd taken apart a two-stroke engine when she was 10 years old, and I laid out everything I'd found. The headshot, the registration number, the non-existent regulator, the compliance officer's assessment, the procurement manager's phone call from a fake journalist. She didn't say anything for a long time. The reference your husband checked, I said, was real. That person exists, he knew your husband, and he was manipulated into being a reference without knowing it. That's why this felt credible. It was designed to feel credible. Someone spent time on this. Who? She said. I don't know who's at the top of it. I know Roland Thierry isn't a real name and the face on his profile belongs to someone in Kitchener who has never heard of him. I know the fund isn't registered. I know the regulatory body is invented. Beyond that, I can't tell you who built this or how big it is. She had the subscription agreement on the table in front of her. She'd printed it out and brought it in a folder. She looked at it for a long time. We didn't sign it, she said. I know. That's why we have options. We reported it the next morning. My daughter called the RCMP's Economic Crime Unit. I filed separately with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre through their online portal. They have a dedicated stream for investment fraud, and the more complete the information you provide, the more useful it is to investigators who may be building a case across multiple jurisdictions. With my compliance officer contact, put us in touch with someone at the actual Nova Scotia Securities Commission who confirmed within 24 hours that Crestview Yield Partners had no registration of any kind with their office, and that the registration number used on the website was assigned to a defunct firm. The RCMP was measured about what they told us. They said there was an active file. They said they couldn't share details. They said we had done the right thing by not transferring any funds. That last part was the one I kept coming back to. They hadn't signed it. 12 days and a deadline designed to create urgency, and they hadn't signed it yet. My daughter's instinct that something was off, that one misplaced detail about a plant closure, had bought us just enough time. I asked her, later, when it was just the two of us, what made her think to say wrench that night at the kitchen table. I didn't decide to, she said. It just came out. I think I needed you to know something was wrong without being able to say it in front of anyone. And that was the only word I had that he wouldn't understand. The one word that belonged only to us. From 30 years ago on a garage floor, her husband took some time to come around. He'd felt certain about the opportunity, and having certainty taken away isn't easy, especially when you've done your own research and it still wasn't enough. He's a good man. He was embarrassed, and embarrassment is hard to sit with. He got there eventually. A few things are worth saying plainly, because this story isn't just mine to keep. The person who approached my daughter was not some obvious con artist. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, informed about her specific industry, and connected, apparently, to someone she and her husband trusted. The website was professional. The documents looked official. The fund had a credible name. The deadline was framed as exclusivity, not pressure. Every element was designed to make skepticism feel rude. Investment fraud in Canada is not a fringe problem. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre reported over $500 million in fraud losses in a recent year, and that figure only counts what gets reported. Most of it doesn't. The things that broke this particular scheme open were all small. A plant closure mentioned that shouldn't have been known, a registration number that didn't match, an oversight body that didn't exist, a retired regulator who knew what to look for, and a daughter who hadn't used a garage nickname in 20 years but knew, somehow, that it was the right word for the moment. If something feels off, not wrong, just off, just slightly misaligned in a way you can't quite name, that feeling is worth following. These schemes don't fail because people suddenly become sophisticated. They fail because someone paused. Don't let the deadline move you. Don't let the exclusivity language move you. Don't let the warmth of the relationship move you, because that warmth was manufactured for exactly this purpose. Verify the registration. Look up the regulator. Run the headshot. Call the reference directly and ask them specifically, did you recommend this person? Ask it in those words, not softer words. And if you have someone in your life who's seen how things break down before they break, call them. Use whatever word you need to use. She did, and that made the difference.